Our second reading today is from the Gospel according to Luke chapter 14, verses 1 to 14. On one occasion, when Jesus was going to the house of a leader of the Pharisees to eat a meal on the Sabbath, they were watching him closely. Just then, in front of him, there was a man who had dropsy, and Jesus asked the lawyers and Pharisees, "Is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath or not?" But they were silent. So Jesus took him and healed him and sent him away. And then he said to them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that has fallen into a well, will you not immediately pull it out on a Sabbath day?" And they could not reply to this. And when he noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not sit down at the place of honor, in case someone more distinguished than you has been invited by your host. And the host who invited both of you may come and say to you, "Give this person your place." And then in disgrace, you would start to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. He said also to the one who had invited him, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, in case they might invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." May God speak to us through these verses today. When we read the Gospels, most of the time, we hear about Jesus sharing a meal with what is sometimes called social misfits and outcasts. Every now and then, we hear about him sitting down at a table with respectable and religious upper-class folks, like today when he dines with a Pharisee and his friends. Oh, you might wonder, was the atmosphere of these meals different? Probably. Not only would the food and the company be different, but when upper-class people invite Jesus to their homes, it seems to be more out of a kind of curiosity or even a desire for entertainment value. Often it seems that those folks don't quite know what to make of this Jesus, so they invite him over to study him, kind of poke and prod at him, see what makes him tick. Luke says they were all watching him very closely. Maybe they expect him to do or say something outrageous, as he often does. Of course, not all Pharisees were against Jesus or plotting against him. More than likely, some of them really were interested in him, maybe wanted to have some deep conversation with him. So they enter this house of the Pharisee, and right away, everyone starts picking out the best seats at the table. Now, in those days, I read, there was a table pecking order, and it showed who was more important. The host, of course, always sat at the head of the table. The choicest seats of honor were those on the right and left hands. Those were reserved for the next most important people in the room. Now, beside them would sit the next most important, and so on down the line. Down at the far end, this should make you think about sitting in the back of this room. Down at the far end would be the least important people in the room. Get up here. Now, here's the thing, though. Suppose you are the most important person in the room and you get this best seat next to the host. You're feeling pretty good about yourself. But then, after everybody settles in, imagine that another guest suddenly arrives, someone higher up than you. It would then be your duty to get up and move down the line so that they can have that place of honor. That would mean that everybody then has to play a little game of musical chairs, right? Moving down the line. Wouldn't it be a tad embarrassing and a little ridiculous? Now, as that's happening, picture Jesus standing off on the side watching this game of musical chairs, but refusing to play along with it. Jesus never plays along with our ego trips and power plays, does he? Instead, he teaches them a lesson about what we might call table manners. Listen, he says, wouldn't it be better to start out taking that lower seat first? Then the host might ask you to move up to a higher seat. Think how good that would make you feel. Don't try to honor yourselves, he says, because that makes you selfish and arrogant. If you deserve to be honored, let someone else do it for you. You think too highly of yourself, you'll wind up being humbled. You'll be brought down a peg or two. But if you strive to be humble, that is what really lifts you up and does you honor. Now, those dinner guests believed that those seats gave them honor and made them greater, made them superior. They expected those seats because they felt they deserved them. But in their sense of their own, if their sense of their own personal value was depending on external things, on their wealth, their power, their social standing, the opinions of others. Maybe we all fall into that trap sometimes ourselves. But rest assured, it is a trap. Because it means we are giving other people and the things that we own the power to determine who we are and what we're worth, rather than finding those qualities within ourselves. And if we judge ourselves that way, how easy it then becomes for us to judge others by the same standards. That's what helps to create prejudice. It helps to set up the barriers that we use to divide the world into us and them. Instead, Jesus wants us to judge ourselves and others by very different standards, as human beings and especially as children of God. One of the ways we do this is by cultivating deeper spiritual values, like humility. Humility simply means recognizing that we all share a common humanity, a humanity that is one in God and therefore equal. So we all deserve the same rights and the same respect. And this further asks us to understand that there are times when we are called to look beyond our own wants and needs and consider the wants and needs of others, especially the less fortunate. Times when we are asked to take a few steps down to help others take a few steps up. And times when we should turn our spiritual focus and energy outward rather than just inward. Jesus gives his host an example of how to do this. He says, listen, Mr. Pharisee, when you give a dinner party, don't just invite your rich friends and important relatives. They already have all they need and more. Then they'll have you over to dinner to repay you, and you'll have them back over, and your little group will just go round and round each other's houses, enjoying the good life. But he says, you know who you should invite? The people who can't repay you. The people who can't do the same thing for you. They are the ones who really need a decent meal and some human companionship. That's where you find true honor. Now, really, Jesus is describing more than just good table manners. He is describing an entirely different social ethic. He is describing a better way of life that can help us create a better world. He is talking about the kingdom of God, which he frequently compares to a dinner party. And he says people will come out from all over the world to feast at this party. And at that dinner party, there is no pecking order. There are no special places of honor. Everyone's place is a place of honor. My friends, we learn to value and honor everyone if we truly understand and truly believe in our hearts that God values and honors everyone and invites all of us to the divine party. Now, that's a big challenge, not just as individuals, but also as churches. Some of you have heard this story before, but I remember hearing about an incident once that happened once in our very own presbytery. You know how church people love their favorite seats in the pews? But not us, though. At this particular church, there was a woman who had been sitting in the same pew for many years, and everybody knew it was her seat. One Sunday morning, she came in and found a stranger sitting there. The woman got all flustered. She made a scene. She demanded the stranger go find another seat. Whereupon the stranger got up, and instead of finding another seat, he left the building and never returned. I would have done the same. That incident might have told that man everything he needed to know about that church. But even among members in a church, certain individuals or families will jockey for power, for control over the church. I have known churches like that. I'm pretty sure Katie probably has too. Or maybe somebody's great whoever founded the church and they think that makes it their church. Or where the family in town with all the money thinks they can call all the shots in the church. They even intimidate other people or make other members take sides on issues, and so on. Paul the Apostle had to deal with some of that in the early church, and even Jesus did among his own disciples. In the Gospels, we read that the brothers James and John approached Jesus and asked for special seats at his right and left hands in the coming kingdom. And when the other disciples heard about this, they were pretty angry. They were afraid James and John were trying to lord it over them. And Jesus had to set them straight. Now, I know, too, that some churches insist that the Lord's Supper is a meal reserved only for a kind of privileged few, only those with the right sort of people, only people who have the right theology or right sort of faith, live the right sort of lives. And they will bar that table to anyone else who does not. I don't believe that's what Jesus intended. He once said that in the great feast of the coming kingdom, some of us will be very surprised at who gets to sit there and who does not. If he is any example for us, I believe Jesus wants us to invite everyone, especially people who feel forgotten, abandoned, abused, and outcast, people who cannot repay us, people who cannot repay God with the same faith or the same lives that maybe we are striving for. Jesus was willing to share a meal with anyone, no matter who they were, what they may have done. He put aside any notion of privilege or worthiness so that he could bring the love of God to them. And if we are his followers, are we not called to do the same? The way for us to show that same love, that love that has the power to change hearts and heal lives.